Hi, everyone. My name is Summer Kim Lee, and I'm an assistant professor of English at UCLA. And it really is, I didn't do anything, but it really is my pleasure to get to be a part of this conversation of this amazing work, which I was also really lucky to see in person. But seeing the film was like a completely different experience of something that I feel like I remember so well in my mind. So this was amazing. I have my phone, but that's because I'm reading bios, not just being weird. So I'm going to introduce everyone. So Alexandro Segade is the librettist and co-director of Star Choir and was also the director of the film. And his transdisciplinary art projects envision spectacular queer world building. His dystopian play, Future Street, published by Yale Theater Journal in 2017, and other multimedia science fiction performances have been presented at the Park Avenue Armory and Judson Church in New York, Time-Based Art Festival in Portland, Oregon, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco, Red Cat at the Broad in LA, among elsewhere. Segade's graphic novel, The Context, was published by Primary Information in May 2020, and his comics have appeared in Artforum and Creative Time Comics. Segade's recent writing has been published in Artforum, Keywords for Comics, out with NYU Press, and Comic Velocity, out with Visual Aids. Segade is an assistant professor of visual arts at UC San Diego.
Go Tritons. I'm also a Bruin, just so you know.
It's like controversial.
2 times.
And Malik Gaines's composition work extends from a performance practice that has insistently defied boundaries, using genres of theater and media to address pressing social and political questions. Gaines's music work has incorporated popular and avant-garde forms, from musical theater to progressive rock and soul to experimental sound with traditional influences. Gaines's consistent project is to arrange for multiple voices, offering oral proposals for forms of collaboration, dialogue, and dispute. Gaines is a writer and researcher, author of Black Performance on the Outskirts of the Left, A History of the Impossible with NYU Press, and many articles and essays about art and performance. Gaines joined the industry's Artistic Director Cooperative in 2021, and he is also an associate professor of visual arts at UC San Diego. And last but not least, we have Kelci Hahn, a Korean-American soprano, highly sought-after, versatile vocalist and music industry professional based here in LA. As a stage performer, some recent highlights include the industry's production of Star Choir and their other production of Sweetland, the LA Phil's groundbreaking productions of Meredith Monk's Atlas, Gabriela Ortiz's The Glitter Revolution, and 2 of Ellen Reid's new works, Oscillations and The World Doesn't Exist. She can also be heard and seen as a soloist and ensemble member in over 100 film and TV and video game scores, such as the TV show Arcane and Disney's Wish and Frozen 2 and the Star Wars franchise, among many others. She can also be seen as a featured performer in collaboration film with artist Doug Atkin and the Los Angeles Master Chorale, set to release in late 2024. And Kelci works behind the scenes also as a music production coordinator, vocal contractor, and teaching artist. So yeah, thank you.
Kelci!
That's thorough. I wanted to be thorough. So I wanted to just first start by getting a sense of where this project started. Just thinking about how it first came into your mind as something that you wanted to work on together, because I know that the project has had different iterations and stages. So would love to hear that, and thinking about what kinds of inspirations or influences you worked through together, just to start.
Can we start? Okay. Thanks so much to everyone for being here. Really appreciate it, and thank you to the Hammer for letting us share this with everybody. And yeah, thinking back, wow. Well, I mean, when did I see Alien? It was on HBO. I was 8. The influences, the sort of like material that we're working through is everything from kind of contemporary theory discussions of the Anthropocene or things that come after it, And so we think about Donna Haraway and Zakiya Jackson as two theorists that we were reading at the time that we were really developing this work. But it was in many ways a response to work by Ridley Scott and Octavia Butler, and thinking also about collaboration. As I watch this, I think about how so much of these narratives about the space crew that has to like work together to deal with this alien force is really about any collaborative project, whether it's a theater company trying to mount a play in an observatory, or an audience encountering a weird work on a screen. So in a lot of ways, it was about looking at the sort of potential for being together through these ideas of science fiction. And I can go through a list forever of science fiction novels that were an influence, especially to the libretto. Of course, Le Guin is a big figure for us. Thinking about people like Ted Chiang and Kay Jemison as maybe more contemporary versions of that kind of interest in a social component of science fiction. And then there's also this experience of working in theater and thinking about the crew not only as like people who man a spaceship, but also people who come together to make this kind of work.
Yeah, and we, Xandro and I, and thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to share this with you and to be here with Kelci and a bunch of other people who worked on the production are here. And we, Xandro and I, have worked together on a performance for decades, a lot of work with the group My Barbarian, including on this very stage over the years. And we always were using music. We always wanted to speak quite critically about, social relationships, but we also wanted to have some of the like pleasure and camp and sort of joy of kind of like queer performance traditions. And we've done a lot of that ourselves and have, experience. And we're thinking, how can we work with more and more skilled musicians? And the kind of idea of opera sort of appeared for us. And we had already composed things for other actors, other performers, other musicians to work on. And I always have enjoyed, I like a history movie. I was a history major, and we've always worked through genres as ways of sort of conveying stories through kind of recognizable forms. And something about science fiction to me is like history, but in the future, and it is a kind of proposal for things that could happen. And so I was really sort of attracted to that for this particular story. And then we just had different opportunities to develop it over the years, including when I was invited finally to be an artistic director on the team at the Industry, which, as many of you who are industry fans know, is renowned for dealing creatively with sites and doing experimental collaborative music theater works. So it all just came together really perfectly. And working with people like Kelci, who had a relationship with the company before, and then going out and finding new people to be part of our team.
Yeah, just something that I was thinking about with what you were talking about of wanting to think of the complications around social relations was even that moment where we're learning that the reptilian creatures that brought the decapods to Aurora destroyed each other because they could read each other's minds and they were too different from each other. And there's something interesting, but then there was the line of being but Lycan actually manages to survive because there's kind of a relinquishing of any kind of difference of thought. And that somehow, I don't know, that just reminded me of that one particular moment that I thought was so interesting. And it reminded me too of the beautiful piece that you perform on top about telepathy and communication and what other kinds of communication emerge or aren't possible. But along the question of opera, I was thinking about something, Sandra, that you had said a few days ago about how, and this is something that you worked on with those performing as well, that opera is understood as the old. So how is it that you imagine an opera that takes place in the future? And so I'm to me, it reads like this convergence of thinking of science fiction and opera, precisely as you said about these ways that you want to work through genre and form and see what they do to each other, which I feel could be mirrored in the decapods with the humans. But so I would love to know more about specifically how it is that you saw opera and sci-fi coming together in the music and in the libretto, and what like productive or interesting like openings, but also constraints like presented themselves, because both do have their conventions. So yeah, would love to know how that worked out for you.
I mean, I'd kind of like to know how you felt doing that, because in a lot of ways, what we were realizing was that there are science fiction operas, and there's a thing called space opera, which is a kind of genre of science fiction. But there is something about the like totality of production that's required to create either one within a kind of, there's a relationship to spectacle, but there's also its relationship to a kind of, I want to say like potential for imagining ways of working together, you know? A lot of operas are tragedies, a lot of science fiction is too. But I'm kind of wondering, like, for the performers, and this is something we did have to kind of come up with our own language of how to approach singing the piece and how to embody the piece, like how it felt, and how those conversations around, like, what does it mean to be an opera singer in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like, what is opera? You know, I think it's a real interesting question, because opera is seen as so stuffy and so traditional, but like that's not what opera is. Opera is just a story sung. And what's fun about doing pieces like this, it takes you out of that conditioned viewpoint of what opera should be, or who should be singing it, or how it should be sung. So what's fun about this is we get to sing it however we want to, with whatever is influencing us, whether it's the space that we're using to influence the way that we're singing, or the type of music, or the type of instrumentation. All of that gets to play into the way in which we use our voice and the way we use our bodies, which we don't always get to do in a traditional setting. It's pretty set as it is, but with pieces like this we get to play, and that's what the fun part about it is. And yeah, in the different kind of characters and bodies that we came into as characters throughout the opera, we got to shift our tone, shift our everything, which is really fun. You get to play a wide spectrum of character and a wide spectrum of voice. That is really what's fun and really challenging as an artist, and very different from your kind of traditional structure. So I really love it, but I'm weird. Like, give me the weird stuff.
Yeah, I guess, musically, I like the opportunity to incorporate a lot of different influences, and I played in bands back in the day. I played the synthesizer, so that's a good place to start for science fiction, right? You need a synth sound. But I like the way that recurs in kind of like minimalist, like 80s music, when orchestral instruments and synthesizers are doing the same thing, or you have forms of repetition that kind of signal this kind of like atmosphere of experimentation and science, but also it's ultimately about people singing together. So the different ways you can put voices together that have to do with, Baroque music, but also have to do with like, folk and protest singing and, pop groups and boy bands, like all of it gospel has come into contact with this piece. So there was a kind of like, because it was science fiction, I started thinking about a kind of like early 20th century experiment. Like in theater grad school, we would read these plays from the 20s about automation and the anxieties of the future and stuff like that. But from there, it kind of allowed me to reach into a lot of different areas, especially as the singers are portraying different positions, different characters, different species at different parts of the performance. So I have no fear of eclecticism, and so I just went there.
The other thing that I was noticing around that is like even the difference you're saying of the way the voices layered with each other. So like the stars had a much more kind of like choral, ethereal harmony versus like I think it was like when the lichen are singing, or it's like the atmosphere. It is this like more of like this weird, chaotic, like mushing of voices that like mirrors the kind of like growing that's happening there. So yeah, I thought that must have been so fun, and also hard to move through all of that. So I'd love to hear more about your experience with that. But even I'm thinking of like in relation to other works you've done with like the industry, for example, of how that adapting to different kinds of spaces played out for you, especially with the Mount Wilson Observatory.
Yeah, I mean, I love using a site to influence your work. That's what's really exciting about being in LA. We have so many wonderful locations that can inspire creativity. So being in a space like the Observatory is really exciting because you're not only in kind of a mega historical location, but you're also in a sonic masterpiece. You know, if you've been up there, you can speak in one place and hear it in the other side of the dome, or sing at the dome and someone over there hears it. And just playing with location is so fun as an artist. It's like you get to just use the space around you to influence the way that you are. And especially when we're doing something like this, when you're in a telescope, it's really just takes you to the next level. But I mean, the biggest challenge, and my other fellow artists, like also like huge shout out to the other performers in this. Yes. I was so impressed watching everybody on the stage because, you know, one of the biggest challenges for us was the temperature, frankly. Like, it was so cold. And if you were there, you were shivering with us, but you were clothed. We were not. So, you know,
we could see your
breath. See our breath. Yeah, we were giving breath. We were giving, you know. But that was an elemental challenge that is something that you don't ever really have to experience unless you're in a site-based work, you know. And the same thing with Sweetland. Well, if anyone saw Sweetland, we got canceled because of the pandemic. Like, that is a challenge of just the world. But also being outside, you have to balance, like, how do you sing outside? You have to change the way your instrument works for every environment that you're in, every sort of sonic resonant space that you're working in. And in Mount Wilson, it was particularly challenging because of the feedback. We got our feedback of our voices, like the echo of it all. And yeah, the temperature. But we used it, you know, we found our ways to work through it. And those types of things take you out of the mental headspace of performing, which in a way is a blessing because you're not so focused on perfection, focused on how do I look? How am I performing? Am I really awesome on stage? You're just like, oh my God, can I breathe? Like, am I shaking? Can anyone see that I'm shaking? But, you know, so then you start to focus on just the body, focus on the breath, focus on your presence in that moment. And that's really what it's all about. And so I think that's what's fun about the site. That's what's fun about being on location. You know, those things really make you a stronger performer, a more outside of your body performer, someone who's more connected to the things around you and connected to the music. So, I mean, I love that type of challenge. I love to be in somewhere that takes you out of your comfort zone and pushes you to a physical limit and an emotional limit, a vocal limit, all of those things.
Was it scary up there?
I mean, I wanted to fly through that dome. You know me. I was like, can we Peter Pan this? Can I like swing across the whole telescope?
Spider-Man into the dark.
There was a harness involved.
There was a harness involved.
There were harnesses. Thank you, Tony Shane, production manager, for for a lot of stuff. Incredible harness wrangling. But and we had so many meetings. We were like, what if there's a fire? Like, for years, you know, planning at this scale, this kind of planning is really complicated. And we got up there. We were rehearsing. It's September in LA. It was like 70s, like all week.
Yeah.
And then the day of the show, this storm comes in. It gets to 45 in the dome, and we hadn't planned winter
great on camera,
costumes,
and that's all I care about.
You got the shot.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say, like, in addition to the amazing work of the cast and the musicians, who some of whom were playing like freezing French horns, you know, or you know, working with their harps in that situation. Also, all the technicians, the lighting design, the entire crew, production crew, the sound engineers, because that room is built for something else. I don't know if you guys know that. It has another purpose, and nothing that we wanted to do in there is it designed for. So that all had to be built in one day, and then the camera crew who were there as sort of almost like as a peripheral, like Saturn ring of the whole thing, capturing it from different angles at every single performance, using cameras all over the place, and then finally the editor cutting that all together. So I see, you know, when I say collaboration, I do think about it along these lines, like, and the planet, you know, in this is sort of the uncontrollable thing. That's kind of the audience. That's that thing that you can't quite tell what's going to happen, but you have to have a symbiotic relationship with them, whether or not it's always positive. But but in this case, luckily, like it felt really good, and it kept us all coming back the next day. So anyway, I just think of the whole thing as like a sort of metaphor, but also real life example of what people can do when they work together to make something, beautiful. And in many ways, this piece is really it ends with this idea of giving life time, like this idea that if we are to care for each other, we could potentially have more of this, So I felt like it all kind of, it goes from, the idea of the word written on the page all the way through to getting people in their seats in a nice way, and all of that has to happen in this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, I loved the different kind of scale of time happening with the stars beginning and ending, singing. I'm probably getting the lyric wrong, but like, when we die, we'll take you with us, and then give lifetime is then what immediately follows that. But I was thinking of exactly like how much the collaboration of the performance itself is kind of mirroring the humans' attempts to survive in a hostile, inhospitable place, and how the telescope itself was that. So you're dealing with the like, I am just trying to be warm and okay while performing, and like how even that is then a part of the performance itself, because I think it is about such a particular kind of like survival that you're understanding too, or that you're working through in it. And I was thinking about it because, and I mentioned to you this a lot, but when we drove up, it was like very, very cloudy and rainy in LA. And then you drive so high up that then we were one of the days where it was like 70 something. So then we were up there, and then it was like very clear sky, sun. And then we were in the telescope during the performance. And there was like a bat, a small bat that was like flying in circles during the performance. And I was realizing now that I was like, oh, at first it was like a distraction to the performance, but then it also was thinking of like, how is it that we as the audience have actually like disturbed this bat's own place? And so like everyone is just trying to figure out how to be in the space together. Like we're trying to make sure the bat is fine, but also trying to not be in their performance. So yeah, I felt like there was like on many levels, that was something that was getting worked through. It's a really cute bat.
I mean, the sonic experience in there was probably psychedelic for the bat. It was really
All of us.
But lastly, I think that the last two questions I had were thinking specifically about how it is that you chose the Mount Wilson Observatory. Like, were you looking for other locations in LA specifically? Did you have, if you're thinking about this planet Aurora in space, like were you automatically thinking about that space? And just for you both, like how it is that then you conceived of the performance kind of like in this version of the round. And then the last question is just thinking of, Sandra, how did it feel for you to go about filming and then kind of like recreating the performance as a film?
Yeah, well, part of the magic of the industry is going on extensive hunts for unusual spaces. And, we looked around, went to some of the usual suspects. We had a meeting with the Griffith Observatory people, and we looked over at a couple, different spaces. And this came up, and, I think I had been there before sometime in the past, but when we went for the first visit, I'm not sure who was there. I think Elizabeth Klein, the previous executive director, was with us. And it was just so magical, and it's such an unusual place. Have people been there before other than for this? Yeah, it's really an unusual place. It doesn't feel like it's from the present because so much of its kind of interface is just kind of available for you. Seems like there's not a lot of like insurance risk management in the ethos of the place. And it's this difficult acoustic space. Mark Lowenstein, the music director, we were like up there like snapping our fingers in different corners trying to figure out how it would work. But it has so much built into it, and this kind of spherical orientation, and this super amazing rotation that they were like, yeah, spin it around, it's great, open the thing, close the thing. Like we were just so surprised at how accommodating the astronomers were and the people who run it, and they really, when we first got there, they were a bit suspicious, but by the end they were in love with the piece as well. And yeah, I mean, Xandra worked a lot on the sort of movement staging. I also saw Milka Georgievich here, who was the choreographer who worked on collaborated with Xandra on movement and did some of those specific choreography pieces, such as the incredible decapod movement. And one thing in the film that's different from the performances is a lot of times in the live show where you're not in front of the person who's singing. They're on the other side of the room, behind a giant telescope. And so a lot of situating it live was to kind of keep it circulating so that there's sort of something for everyone, and we could use this whole 360 span, which I've always been really attracted to. So in the film, suddenly you see everything, and that's what the live things that you lose, that's something you gain in the film.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think I directed it for the camera, but that was because once we secured the location, I thought we were going to do this 4 times for an audience, and it's been this like life's work. But I also always love making movies, and happily we got together a really great crew, including Adhel Rojo, who's here, and Michael Elias Thomas, who's the DP, and then the editor, Justin Streichman, and we're able to come up with a plan, and we knew we would have to work in parallel. We didn't want to interrupt the experience of the viewers. But what we did was, the same way that it was staged, we kind of created a clock, and everybody in the staging and the rehearsal would know, I'm going from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the space, and then we taped the numbers in the space when we got there. And I always said to the performers, it's like we're kind of doing a heist. It's like, here's the plan. It's Ocean's 11 type of thing. We're going to go, you do this, you do that, and we'll make sure it works out. And the same thing happened with the camera crew, where they were each kind of rotating in the circle. Mikey was moving around a lot. You kind of see him in there a couple times, but I figure he's just like another crew member. It's all okay. But yeah, we costumed them, costumed everybody. But then, we had them shooting it, and we were lucky to have a kind of group of camera people who had worked in documentary and also in dance. And I think that really kind of shows, because the camera's moving with the performers are moving with the camera, and we're getting all of those close-ups that we can intercut to kind of make a kind of mosaic of the piece. And that's what happened. And the edit was really like a little bit of a Where's Waldo, like, where's Carmen singing that one line, but we found them. Yeah. So it was amazing.
To say that is part of it, that like when you're sitting there, it is like almost eerie to hear 2 people singing the same part, and one person is in front of you and one person is on the other side of the telescope and you can't see them at all, but it feels like this thing where you were like, I can't tell if that's the echo, if it's like actually another person. So it kind of like multiplies the chorality, or like the kind of collective that you're trying to think of.
I'm glad that worked.
I think we're pretty good.
Okay. I think we're good, is what we said.
We didn't want to go on too long, but I wonder if the people who are musicians and singers in this performance who are here would mind just standing up.
And crew.
And crew, absolutely.
Yes.
Great experience.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you so much for coming. Thank you for sharing the work. I'm so glad it lives a life longer than the performances. And so, I think now you can join us for a reception upstairs. I think there's coffee, tea, maybe snacks. I'm not sure if you get there fast enough. So thank you. Have a good
And we'll
night.
answer any questions if you can find us.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming so much. Thank you.